next up, we have Andrew Skadoff, who's going to be talking about hunting and scoping a ransomware attack. We're rolling into the end of the day, and a lot of times we're like, last but not least. But one thing that I've noticed, I think, with being able to attend these remotely, when you're in person, it seems like attendance kind of starts to drop off a little bit at the end of the day. Maybe people are going out sightseeing, or they're heading out to catch their flights to get home. And being able to do this remotely, I've noticed that the attendance stays pretty consistent all the way through, which is really a treat. For the presenters that are wrapping up our session, because it's just all such fantastic information. I'm glad to see so many people, are still here and hanging out with us. So thank you all. So Andrew is a cybersecurity senior manager at Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. And has been in threat hunting and digital forensics for almost 20 years. One of the things that I find really fascinating about his background, and kind of talking about, people coming in from all walks of life, is that he was raised by a Top Gun Marine fighter and a middle school special education teacher, which sounds like it's really kind of played a hand in maybe how he got into this field, because it really is driving him to find meaningful work, solve interesting problems, and help out others to do the same in an effort to make the world a better place. And when we think about everything we've been learning here over the last couple of days, ultimately, a lot of what we do is helping somebody. I know that when I work cases, a lot of times they're just relieved to have somebody there to help them through whatever it is that's going on, figure out what happened, even if it doesn't always mean the best outcome for them. We are helping companies that are in turn helping people. We're keeping the lights on for those companies and keeping things running. So I will go ahead and turn it over to Andrew.
Thanks, Mary. Appreciate it. Thanks for the intro and the background. It is a passion of mine to find meaningful work, as you described. I appreciate that. So, yep, I am Andrew Skadoff. I'm privileged to be with you here today. As I've been, on the other side of these conversations and watching presentations over the years, I always found myself kind of, grabbing my notepad to write down some of the things that have been seen in the wild, right? Like whether they're attack patterns or really the lowest hanging fruit probably is the command line patterns and things like that we see, whether those are actions on objectives or actually just the malware doing its thing. So I've kind of put this deck together with a lot of that information. So hopefully very practical. I may have more slides than I have time for, but I will try to pace it and deliver the content in a way that hopefully I don't have to rush too much at the end. But anyway, the reason we're here is we want to talk about ransomware and what can you do to kind of measure an attack if you are faced with one. How can you quickly determine which devices are impacted and in what way were they impacted? Because you may find there are times where a device may be compromised but not yet encrypted, and we want to be able to identify those as quickly as possible to stop the bleeding, if you will. So that's kind of what we wanted to cover. So let me jump into the slides here. So what is special about ransomware? Fundamentally, why do we need something different than what we already have for all our other types of detections? And I guess I would say that there are TTPs that are unique to ransomware. A subtle implant that's trying to slowly steal your data is not going to behave the same way or perform the same types of actions as a destructive or a ransomware attack. So we want to focus in on some of those things that are unique. And so fundamentally, I think even in my shop, we've sometimes had a debate like what kind of detection rule should we have. Often we might think about ransomware as this monolithic thing that you don't need to detect it. It's not trying to hide. It will be in your face. Your users will be screaming, and you will know immediately. And what I want to say to that is, as I kind of intimated a moment ago, is that it's not always that simple, right? There may be cases where you have an opportunity to intervene. So, for example, there's a link to a report here of a Soda Nokibi or Revel ransomware sample, not just a sample, but an actual attack where the attack was conducted in such a way that the encryption process didn't happen until the user logged back in after it had done some preparatory work. So in that type of situation, obviously there may be an opportunity to intervene, grab those devices, perhaps forensically image them before they can be encrypted, so you actually don't lose data in that type of situation. So some key takeaways that we want to think about here is, as I said, scope the attack. Let's see if I can find out exactly how many devices have been compromised before those help desk calls start coming in. See if I can isolate the impact and so forth. So this slide is a wall of text, but I wanted to focus in on basically saying, this is a normal set of stages and activities for a ransomware attack. However, what we're going to focus on are some of those things that are specific. So we'll talk about the fact that ransomware will often take some steps to enumerate your defenses, disable your defenses, or configure them in a suboptimal way that's, well, optimal for them, but not for you. Undo your access controls and unlock files so that they can be manipulated and encrypted, and destroy evidence and destroy your backups and things of that nature. So that's our focus, and let's jump into some of the nerd level details here. So, and this is a little bit of a prerequisite slide here. So I want to talk about the fundamentals of detection and the telemetry that we need before we can even start building any detection or hunt analytics. So first off, much of the material in this slide deck is tied to command lines. So if you're not logging command lines in your security logs or with an EDR solution, these TTPs are going to be very hard to detect. Security policies, GPO configuration are going to be needed to capture process execution. And you can reference a malwarearchaeology.com for cheat sheets on how to do that. And if that's set up correctly, it's a couple of different settings. You're going to need to set it up to actually log process execution. That will give you the file name or the executable that's being launched, but there are other settings that you have to configure for verbose logging that will give you the full command line. And that's where we're going to find a lot of the easiest wins in terms of detection and hunting for these TTPs that we're going to go over. In like manner, the sysmon corollary to the 4688 event code for process execution, the sysmon is going to be event code 1. So basically, we want to, throughout this deck, we're going to assume that that's enabled. You can see command logs in a verbose manner, and those are going to be like highlighted. And I'm sorry, I apologize. There's been a little bit of a mix-up with some of the slides, so I've provided some updates that aren't here. So forgive me for being disoriented. But we'll talk about in each slide. We'll show examples of those command lines, and then in a table like the one you see here, we will show some alternative or supplementary ways to detect the TTPs that we're going to review. And over here, just kind of highlighting what some of those other log sources are that we're going to make mention of throughout the slides. And one more point to make, hopefully obvious at this point: centralized logs are a must. You're not going to be able to scale sweeps across your enterprise if you're not collecting all this stuff in a centralized place. Particularly if they go ahead and delete the logs, which we'll talk about as well. One moment. Okay, so one of the first TTPs or categories of TTPs we're going to talk about is enumerating defenses and then disabling those defenses. What we're going to see oftentimes is PowerShell or PowerShell using WMI to enumerate your antivirus products, your firewall, your anti-spyware product. Typically, a lot of times that's the same thing, but these are the WMI terms that can collect that information for you. Down on the fourth bullet here, another PowerShell command, pretty simple to just test it on your own. WMIC is another invocation of the WMI framework to list all the processes. And oftentimes you'll see that output piped to like a find str command with some strings like Symantec or McAfee or something like that to make the malware or the actor aware of what particular security products you're running. And then so a little bit another way to query the running services is the SC command. An SC query will give you a similar list to WMIC process list. This is everything running. This is SC query are just the items that are actually defined as services. And I should mention before we get too much further down the road, let's go back a couple slides. Yeah, right here. So as you know, after this is the stuff we see the most of, right? Because hopefully we're looking at failed attacks on a regular basis, right? However, you know, typically if those attacks proceed, you get to privilege escalation, either on that endpoint or, you know, through the whole domain. And so I wanted to point out, just as we go forward, you know, this first slide is really probably the main one where you just need read access to or regular user access to see this stuff. A lot of the following slides are going to have the sort of presupposition that the actors have already gotten admin rights on your system. So for example, stopping services, deleting services, killing processes, in all likelihood, that's going to require admin rights, depending on the process. But if it's one of your security tools, you're going to need admin rights to kill those processes. So here's some commands that we've seen in a lot of the public open source reporting of malware and its behaviors and attacks and actions on objectives, hands-on keyboard activities in some of these attacks. We have stopping a Windows update service, using SC to pause the Microsoft Defender service and or delete those services. So one of the things we'll note here too is that some of these behaviors are going to be detectable through other means. So in addition to stopping services, deleting services, we have killing processes, a couple of different ways that we've seen that happen too. WMIC process, where name like, and then some wildcards and maybe win defend for identifying how to, or, you know, identifying that Windows Defender process and then followed by the delete directive. So these are all things, again, if I've put it in the gray highlight here, that means it's a command line item that you can probably detect with your security log event code 4688 or your sysmon event code 1. That again that's implied for all the following slides. But some additional ways you might be able to find some of this stuff. As it relates to the SC command or the net stop command, you might find event code 7036 in the system log as a service start or stop event. And if the startup value of that service is changed, you'll likely see an event code 7040 with that information as well. In terms of the task kill command, we may, I haven't done a lot of testing on this, but you may see a 4689, which is a process exit event. And so you may want to look for even spikes in that, or spikes in services stopping, spikes in tasks being killed, things like that. Because in a lot of cases, we'll see not just, you know, security tools being disabled, but also, you know, all kinds of regular business processes being disabled, because the objective here is to make sure that the files are unlocked so that they can be encrypted. So another handful of techniques on disabling defenses, and specifically the security tools. Here we have some more ways to disable Windows Defender that we've seen in the wild. And then with PowerShell, we have a number of options here to kind of not turn it off, but actually kind of get to the equivalent goal, which is it doesn't necessarily do anything. So rather than turning off Defender, which might raise some alarms, instead we see this particular actor adding the entire C drive to an exclusion list, and or adding all EXEs to an exclusion list so they can get their tools on there without Defender barking about it. And in the same manner, disabling real-time monitoring, disable behavior monitoring. I recommend that we just use this MP preference string as a nice variable to get a baseline on whether any of this stuff is occurring in the environment as normal activity, and if not, add that to either detection or you know, your pre-canned set of hunts that you might need to deploy in the event of an attack like this. So again, additional detection opportunities. If you're running sysmon, you have the opportunity to monitor registry keys, and this one in particular will capture those exclusion tampering techniques. And again, 7040 for the start type change on the services in the system event log. And then I don't know if a lot of folks are collecting their Defender logs, but if you are, you can also capture some tampering with those as well, with the 5001 to detect AV real-time being disabled, and 5007 to detect Defender configuration changes. This is I think our last slide on the disabling of security tools, but we have a few more few more techniques here. So netsh is going to be your living off the LAN binary for tweaking the Windows firewall settings, and we have several examples here. So we have the event codes again for the service tampering, 7040, 7036. And we've seen in some cases netstop, shared access, which might seem strange. I'll be honest, I'm still speculating as to why adversary would want to turn off internet sharing or internet connection sharing service. I'm speculating that it has something to do with kind of causing the device or the peer devices that might be using that sharing service to kind of have a difficult time either getting online or receiving remote assistance and things of that nature. And so we have one more here that I just find almost funny and kind of sad. Disabling the task manager. That's just rude. Preventing one from viewing the running processes and potentially troubleshooting or killing any tasks that are critical to the attacker. And that is also something we might be able to find with sysmon monitoring this registry key. If you don't capture it through process or command line logging. So let me do a quick time check. Okay, about halfway through. I think we're going to make it. All right, so a couple of additional hijinks that we might observe from ransomware actors is now that they're on the box, they almost certainly have admin rights at this point, and they need to make sure that there's no explicit ACLs that may be blocking them from accessing files that they want to encrypt. So we're going to do one of two, maybe one of these, maybe both of these, taking ownership of the files. This is a command here where you have the adversary pointing at a share and everything on that share to take ownership of those files. And so if you're not familiar with Windows ACLs, you've got a list of all the people who have access to that item, and then you also have an ownership flag that it is pointing at a particular security identifier. So if I'm the owner, then I can change all the ACLs, and if that kind of makes it a little bit easier to tweak things and make the environment ready for encryption. And then icackles.exe is another one that focuses on those ACL lists. So if I want to really open things wide up, I'm going to grant everyone access to everything on the C drive. So that's the star here, and then everyone, and of course, whoever you are, you're part of everyone. And so here's a few links of some examples of ransomware that's used these techniques. All right, so one more here we have disabling defenses. And this time we're talking about anti-forensics or covering your tracks, right? So inevitably, a lot of these activities are designed to make your data unrecoverable. This one in particular is designed to cover tracks. So we often see this technique to destroy evidence. So clearing event logs, the wevtutil.exe binary is again a living off the land native executable that can be used to clear event logs. These are some example commands. Now, happily, no matter what command you use, or even if you use an API, provided it's not an exploit, we should see these events captured in the system event log. We'll get a 104 if any event log was cleared. And then if you clear the security log, you will get an 1102 as your very next event in that log, or well, your first event in that log, since there's nothing else there. And additionally, we've seen these adversaries do some cleanup on the USN journal. So if you've taken SANS Forensics 508 or 500, you are probably familiar with the USN journal, which is a journal that keeps a log of all file system changes in the NTFS volume. And this is another good anti-forensics technique to kind of make it more difficult for responders and investigators to put back the pieces back together of what has happened. And I'll note that this is not exclusive to ransomware, but it is something we've seen in a lot of the public reporting. So now that we've disabled all the security tools and access control lists, and talked about destroying some evidence, we're going to talk now about what what are some common activities we see for disabling recovery. And so, as you may be aware, there's a command line tool called bcdedit that's going to modify the boot configuration data store. And this data store contains configuration parameters and controls how the operating system is booted. We often see ransomware actors using this utility to disable Windows automatic startup repair. If you've ever had your system, suddenly crash or suddenly become unresponsive, or fail to boot in a proper way, this is a sort of fallback option called Windows automatic startup repair that lets you start up in recovery mode and recover, kind of fix the bugs and problems with the operating system, and hopefully get you back to functional again. Well, what we've seen is that a lot of times the ransomware actors are going to make that impossible by tweaking the bcdedit configurations. And these are some examples here. I'm not aware of any other detection approaches there in terms of event logs or other things. So these are just command line opportunities for detection. So we'll see them kind of tweaking these parameters and then doing a shutdown. And sort of in a similar manner, but maybe with a different goal, some ransomware, the Snatch ransomware is one example, will set up a safe mode service. We'll basically install a service that is only intended to run during safe mode boot. And again, I don't know if you're familiar, safe mode boot is sort of a lightweight, low functionality way to boot up your system. If you're having problems with your system, you can boot in a safe mode and potentially reduce some of the complexities and drivers that are being loaded to put kind of a minimal load on the system, and you can do some troubleshooting. But in this case, they're not trying to prevent troubleshooting. In this case, they're forcing a safe mode boot where their evil service will be launched. So that's another unique, creative technique, really. And again, we can do some registry monitoring potentially to either detect or hunt for those. And so this one is not super sophisticated. We have seen a lot of samples just trying to delete lots of things, like anything that's related to something that might be a backup. They don't want to delete all your real files because they'd rather encrypt them and hold them for ransom. But what they do want to do is prevent you from, having a backup on the side. A lot of the encryptors are going to focus on certain file types, and so instead of just encrypting these backup files, which might be really large, they bypass encrypting those, and instead they just want them gone, right? So all these files ending with these extensions are likely to be backups, and they want them gone and deleted. So this is a simple command line del.exe will take care of that with these wildcards. wb-admin is another utility on the operating system that is used to delete volume, and well, in this case, the attackers are using it to delete volume and system state backups that might be on the system. And then we also have seen PowerShell being used to do similar work with the computer restore point directive. Well, it's get computer restore point to identify it, and then once it has that, it pipes it to the delete computer restore point directive. And computer restore points are one of those features that's tied pretty closely to volume shadow copies, which is again one of those things that's supposed to prevent you, or Microsoft implemented to give you the opportunity to either roll back your system to a known good time point, or recover files that may have been tampered with, corrupted, or in this case encrypted. So they definitely want to get rid of the computer restore point and the volume shadow copies, which we'll talk about a little bit on the next slide as well. Right, so volume shadow copies, as I mentioned, if you were to right click on your favorite Word document, you could find a tab there that will show you if you have any volume shadow copies of that file. And so they exist, on a lot of Windows systems by default. It is configurable. It may or may not be turned on in your environment, but it's becoming pretty normal. It's becoming pretty low impact in terms of processor speed and operations. So definitely recommend you have that on. But the actors know this is a normal thing, and if it is on, it's a good easy way to get your files back. So they want to make sure they destroy all of that before they tell you their ransom demands. So vssadmin is a native Windows tool to manage your volume shadow copies. These commands are the ones to either delete them or shrink them so small that they become completely useless and meaningless. You may wonder why one or the other. It's a cat and mouse game, right? The more we learn, the more we talk about these things, the more they have to adapt and try to find new and creative ways to accomplish similar goals. So if I've got detection for delete shadows and I don't have detection for this, then they've got us. Similar capabilities within PowerShell. We can use the get WMI object and the Win32 shadow copy to kind of identify each of our existing shadow copies, and then for each object, delete. So that's one we've seen as well. And these are all kind of iterations of the same basic process. And I wanted to mention, I forgot to mention PowerShell logging. So script block logging in PowerShell is something that Microsoft implemented with, they studied a lot of the reflective DLL injection post-exploitation frameworks and things of that nature, and identified a number of patterns that I don't believe are public, but they identified a number of patterns of suspicious PowerShell and built them into their detection logic. So they're going to actually log, with script block logging, they're going to log everything that they think is suspicious, and I believe give it at least one go at a base 64 decode. So you will actually potentially get some of these strings, even if they're encoded base 64, as long as it's not like multiple layers of encoding. Okay, so those are the TTPs and techniques that I wanted to cover. I hope that helped explain, some of the most commonly found tactics, techniques, as well as signatures you can use to set up for detection for an early warning system for ransomware, or if it's too late, or you have at least one ransomware compromise, you can quickly use a number of these techniques to search through your SIM, your Splunk, your ArcSight, whatever you have, and identify any other devices that may have been impacted, and hopefully you can find some that are still in a posture that they can be recovered. So that's all I've got. I will hand it back to Mary for the next episode of our adventure.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. There are some questions, and I did have some comments too. I really like that you pointed out the importance of logging command lines, because I think, in a lot of these ransomware cases, the attackers are moving to command line. And, if you're not logging that, you're really going to lose that visibility into all of these wonderful things that you discussed. I also just kind of had to chuckle at your slide. I'm not even mad. That's amazing. I think some of my favorite cases have been the ones that are probably, I'm like really kind of impressed with what the attacker's doing, and I'm really excited to be working the case. Although my client is probably not happy about it. This tend to be
right.
The favorite investigations, right? Like, wow, that's really impressive. They actually deleted, the USN journal, and I'm trying not to smile when I'm telling the client what's going on. Like, oh, that's terrible. They did this, but on the back end, I'm like, wow, that's pretty impressive. In the cases that you're working, how often do you see the USN journal deleted?
Well, so yeah, all of this is OSINT stuff, so it's all publicly available. I've just curated a bunch of it. So I have certainly, seen, a bunch of reporting around that. I don't know that it's super common, but we've definitely got public reporting on that as a TTP that's being used.
Right, exactly. And I wonder how many times it does happen and someone just doesn't realize it because that command line is not being logged and the USN journal is not there. And they're just like, oh, just something with the operating system. And they don't even realize that that's what happened. And someone did make a comment in your Slack channel about a tool that they've used that has helped to recover those, which I also thought was interesting. So a question that I do have from your Slack channel, are the tasks and subtasks being discussed in the slides considered for specific industry focused ransomware? I assume these are financial services focused ransomware mechanics. Can you please clarify if the tasks are being noted across the industry? So are these specific just to the financial industry for those tasks and subtasks, or more broadly applicable?
Yeah, no, these are broadly applicable. And as I mentioned a minute ago, it's all open source intel and reporting, and just kind of pulled these things together. Yeah, this is stuff that's ubiquitous really to whatever the industry target is.
Perfect. Thank you so much for your time today and sharing that with us. I know I definitely saw a lot of comments in your Slack channel saying that this was just jam-packed with a lot of great information. And I hope you'll be able to join us on our panel as well.
Absolutely. It was my pleasure. Thank you so much.